All right, so where did we leave off last time? The migration to where? Abyssinia. Good, alhamdulillah. All right. Um, what were some of the lessons we talked about last week for that hijrah? Huh? What were some of the lessons we learned from the migration to Abyssinia last week? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, alhamdulillah. What were some of the other lessons from? So she talked about like mentioning the Quran, so relating the story to the person. Good. What else? Sacrifice that they did. Okay. Anybody else? Some of them were in the email. That's a hint. I've read the email. What about the slaves? Mm-hmm. Good. Good. Alhamdulillah. Very good. Right? So some people, when they did it, some people weren't able to withstand the persecution, right? Whereas some were. And so as long as they didn't intend to actually really want to leave the faith, them stating it to remove themselves from being persecuted was perfectly fine, right? So, alhamdulillah. All right, so today, a little bit after it, right? So, after these incidents occurred, a couple key people actually converted to Islam, all right? One of them was the uncle of the Prophet, peace be upon him. His name was Hamza, all right? Now, he was someone that was known for his bravery. He was a strong man, a brave warrior. And one day he was out hunting and he came back and he saw people persecuting his nephew, mocking him, making fun of him, all that stuff. And we talked about how family bonds were very strong, right? Because it was the society was very strong in family as well as tribal bonds, all right? Because your family and your tribe meant everything. Your protection, your status, your wealth, your health. If people hurt you, they would be your protection. So he comes back and he sees someone mocking his nephew. And he walks up to him and he says, are you going to like punish or persecute or make fun of the one whose faith I follow? Okay. Now, some people debate whether or not when he said this, he stated essentially that he was a Muslim following the Prophet, peace be upon him. Some say that he converted to Islam out of a different intention, right? Not necessarily because of his faith, but because of his nephew was the Prophet. Some people say that no, he actually did believe, and this was when he kind of came out and said it. Whichever side you take, it's very evident through the rest of his life that he actually did believe in the faith. Maybe not in the beginning, but he did definitely later on in his life actually firmly believe in this faith. The second person was a man named Omar bin Khattab. Now he's an interesting person because he was very vocal at that time. And even vocal in terms of specifically before conversion, he was very vocal against the Muslims. In fact, he was so anti-Muslim that people would say that the donkey of Umar will become Muslim before Umar ever becomes Muslim, right? And it's amazing because, and we'll actually watch some of the video clips, there's a great TV show called, it's an Omar series. It's like a 40 episode series on YouTube. It's about 45 minutes each. I want to actually show you guys the video of the clip of him converting. It's about 10, 12 minutes long. And doing so actually like gives you more insight into how they used to live and dress and act, actually. So that's what we're going to actually do right now. So, whoops. May not have already. All right, here we go. Let me full screen this bad boy. Yes, if you could, please. Let me put the volume up. It's a great show. I watched up to episode, I think, 27. I got there. Oh, it has translations on it. Yeah. Thank God. I need the help translation with it too. All right, so here we go. Let me see if I can put this.
وإني أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
It would help if I was on.
وذاك محمد، إليه يرجع هذا الأمر كله وما جره علينا من مصائب. لوددت لو أذهب إليه فأخترطه بالسيف.
عمر، ما خرجت متوشحا سيفك إلا لأمر عظيم.
أريد هذا الرجل محمدا الذي فرق أمر قريش.
كيف قلت؟
رجل لرجل.
والله لقد غرتك نفسك يا عمر. أترى بني عبد مناف تاركيك تمشي على الأرض وقد قتلت محمدا؟
بل أمضي بعد إذن إلى بني هاشم بنفسي ليقتلوني به وينقضي هذا الأمر. أهون الشرور،
بل أعظمها. أفلا ترجع إلى أهل بيتك فتقيم أمرهم أولا؟
أي أهل بيتي؟
أختك فاطمة بنت الخطاب وزوجها ختانك وابن عمك سعيد بن زيد بن عمرو، فقد والله أسلما وتابعا محمدا على دينه.
فلما أتاها نودي يا موسى إني أنا ربك فاخلع عليك، إنك بالوادي المقدس طوى، وأنا اخترتك فاستمع لما يوحى. يسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي، واجعل لي وزيرا من أهلي هارون أخي، اشدد به أزري وأشركه في أمري كي نسبحك كثيرا ونذكرك كثيرا.
فاطمة، سعيد، هو أنا ذا عمر. هنا لا يصبح.
أخي،
ما هذه الهينمة التي سمعتها عندكما؟
ما سمعت شيئا إلا حديثا تحدثناه بيننا.
بلى والله، لقد سمعت أنكما سبقتما وتابعتما محمدا على دينه، فلا تكذبا.
أرأيت يا عمر لو كان الحق في غير دينك؟
إذا فعلتما. عمر، عمر،
قضى على زوجي أيها المتجبر.
عمر،
يا عدو الله، أتضربني وزوجي ترجع على أن نوحد الله. ما كنت فاعلا فافعل. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أجل، قد أسلمنا على رغم أنفك. يدك عني.
أهذا الذي كنتم تقرؤون منه؟ أعطني إياها فأقرأها.
لا أفعل.
ويحك، قد وقع في قلبي ما قلت. طه، ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى، تنزيلا ممن خلق الأرض والسماوات العلى. الرحمن على العرش استوى، له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وما بينهما وما تحت الثرى. وأن تجهر بالقول فإنه يعلم السر وأخفى. الله لا إله إلا هو، له الأسماء الحسنى. من هذا فرت قريش، إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا، فاعبدني وأقم الصلاة لذكري. إن الساعة آتية أكاد أخفيها لتجزى كل نفس بما تسعى، فلا يصدنك عنها من لا يؤمن بها واتبع هواه فترداه. ينبغي لمن يقول هذا ألا يعبد معه غيره.
سيدي وحبيبي.
خباب، أنت القارئ؟
أبشر يا عمر، فإني أرجو أن تكون قد سبقت فيك دعوة رسول الله. اللهم أعز الإسلام بأحب هذين الرجلين إليك، بأبي الحكم بن هشام أو بعمر بن الخطاب.
أو قد قال ذلك؟
أما والله قد قالها.
The previous scene.
والله إنك لخير الرجلين. وما أظن دعاء النبي يخطئك.
خذوني إلى رسول الله وأصحابه.
إنه عمر بن الخطاب جاء متوشحا بسيفه.
That's Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet.
ما لكم قد وجدتم؟ افتحوا له، فإن يرد به الله خيرا يسلم، وإن يرد غير ذلك يكن قتله علينا هينا. ما جاء بك الساعة متوشحا بسيفك، ألا تنتهي حتى ينزل الله بك قارعة؟
They won't show his face, but this is portraying the Prophet walking up to Umar.
يا رسول الله، جئتك أؤمن بالله وبرسوله وبما جئت به من عند الله.
الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الله أكبر، الحمد لله.
زيد أخي، سبقتني بالإسلام يا زيد.
وما كنت لأستأذنك، فلقد كنت جبارا.
ولن تجدني في الإسلام خوارا، وإني أشهد الله ورسوله وأشهدكم أني لا أترك موقفا آذيت به مسلما إلا وقفت فيه منافحا عن الإسلام لأستدرك على نفسي ما سبقتموني إليه.
Now, every door he's knocking on now are also some of the other leaders that were oppressing Muslims.
عمر، ما وراءك؟
أما علمت أني أسلمت؟
كيف قلت؟
قد أسلمت.
لا تفعل.
بل فعلت.
قبحك الله وقبح ما جئت به. عمر،
أما علمت أني أسلمت؟
أنت؟
نعم.
Them praying to the idols.
أيها الناس، أيها الناس، اعلموا أني قد أسلمت وشهدت أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله.
وقد جئت تتحدانا في نادينا؟ والله لنذيقنك ما كنت تذيق من سبقك.
أكلتكم أمهاتكم؟ هل عدمتم عقولكم؟
ابن الخطاب قد صبأ.
ما؟ امرؤ اختار دينا لنفسه. أتظنون أن بني عدي يسلمون إليكم صاحبهم؟ أما ذكرتم أننا نحن بني سهم حلفاء عدي؟ فما يصيب رجلا منهم فقد أصابنا. انفضوا انفضوا.
This is where we'll wrap it up. Hit the lights. So, very interesting, huh? A couple of things we can take away from this. First is you can see the as we mentioned, the strong grasping to family and tribal bonds that we talked about. Also the persecution, right? As soon as Umar was someone that they loved, right? And as soon as he converted to Islam, they didn't care for him at all. They started to actually fight him, right? You can see some of the bravery that Umar had, where he would, as soon as he converted, and a few other people that did this as well, as soon as they converted, they went around and just let everybody know. Just as a sign of bravery, but also as a sign of putting it back in their face, saying, this is what we are and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Showing the strong resolve that they had in it, okay? So, after Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when you saw his bravery, as soon as Umar was a very feared man for his strength. And as soon as he came in through the door, it was Hamza that went up to the door and was the one that actually like brought him in and like grabbed him by his chest and was like, what are you going to do, right? So it shows you like the strength of Hamza as well. So after this, and a couple other key people converted to Islam, they started to bargain with the Prophet, peace be upon him. They said, okay, well, we're not going to change his mind, but let's see if we can kind of convince him to only be like a part-time prophet or a part-time Muslim, all right? So they said to him, what we'll do is, you worship our gods for like a day, and we'll worship God alone for like a week. And he's like, no. And so they were like trying to bargain with him. Said, we'll worship God for one day, you do one day, every other day, we'll try and work it out. He said, no, maybe a week and then one day. He said, no, a month and one day, no. Right? So they realized that he wasn't going to move. All right? Then they said, okay, well, maybe it isn't worship, maybe he wants money or women, right? Because for them, it was like the same thing. You want money and women, we'll just give it to you because they're all possession. And that's how they treated women at that time. They said, we'll give you the best of riches and the best of women, if that's what you want. I said, no, that's not what I'm here for. And then as you can, in one of the verses in the chapter of the Quran is actually revealed, saying that you will not worship what they worship and they won't worship what you worship, right? And for you is your religion, and for them is their religion, okay? So after this, a lot of the tribes got together and they said, okay, it's clear that he's not going to stop preaching. It's clear that it's not women or wealth or this world that he wants. So what can we do about it? His clan won't give him up for us, right? They won't just give him to us. They're going to stay with him because he's a part of their tribe, even though they themselves don't follow him. So what we'll do is this. Every single other tribe will be kind of like harassed into forming a unity pact of boycotting the tribe of Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims. So from here on out, remember, this is a society that's reliant strictly on trade, okay? So like, you know what? If they don't have anybody to trade with, eventually they're going to run out of food, they're going to run out of water, they can't do anything about it. We'll put political and economic pressure on them, okay? So kind of like sanctioning them. So this went on for about 3 years, okay? And was extremely difficult on the Muslims at that time, and even the non-Muslims that were part of the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They said that it got so bad that every maybe 3-4 days they would find something to eat. Okay. At one point in time, they actually, one of the narrations was, they boiled the soles of their shoes in water and used that as broth. Okay. Now this is like an extreme difficult time because it was made out of leather, and that's what they would do. They would eat leaves, right? Like kind of like a salad or whatever. But obviously, it's not something that it's not something edible. So they would just eat whatever they could. It got that desperate. After a period of about 3 years, Some of the people that were in the boycott just said, we've had enough. This is completely unfair, unreasonable. This is not what we're going to... They ended the boycott essentially after 3 years. But it got really bad after 3 years. Then comes the year of sadness. Now the uncle of the Prophet, peace be upon him, named Abu Talib, while he himself didn't convert to Islam, was someone that helped him politically. All right. So as you saw, even with Umar, right, even though people weren't necessarily Muslim, as long as there was a person from their tribe or a tribe that they had a peace agreement with, then they would be honored. They would have to honor that agreement by standing up for them. So that's what Abu Talib did. He was the political protection for the Prophet, peace be upon him. And his wife Khadija, who was a wealthy merchant, was kind of like the financial support for him. All right. And they both end up actually passing maybe like 4 or 5 months apart from each other. Okay. On his deathbed, Abu Talib was approached by the Prophet, and the Prophet would always talk to Abu Talib and teach and preach Islam to him. So on his deathbed, he was there and the Prophet's there, but 2 other men from Quraysh were also there. And so the Prophet's talking to him about worshiping God alone and believing in God. And then the other 2 men from Quraysh are also there. Don't do this, don't listen to him. This is your legacy that you're leaving. You follow the religion of your forefathers and you'll be honored amongst the people even after your death, blah, blah, blah. And so he himself had a decision to make. And so he ended up deciding to staying on that religion, on that path, for his legacy after him. But what's interesting is that, it's not something, the people that looked up to him maybe passed away a generation or 2 after his passing, right? So you notice that even in this, our legacy after our death isn't even in our hands. So he made obviously what we believe to be the wrong choice. But after his death, now the political protection for the Prophet, peace be upon him, is gone. Okay? Right after this, they started to physically persecute the Prophet in different ways. One of them was while he was in the middle of prayer, Abu Lahab, which was one of the men that we saw earlier in the clip that was yelling at Omar. He was sitting there and he sees the Prophet praying, right? Because as you saw in the clip, people are just gathered around and everyone's praying kind of individually, some to idols, some towards the Kaaba, which is the mosque. So they would see the Prophet sitting there praying, and he says, I dare someone to go and take like camel intestines and to throw it on his body, right? And then, there's no retribution essentially that could be done because the Muslims weren't strong enough at that time to fight back. And the head of that tribe, the political protection for him, had passed away. And so now it was kind of fair game. Whatever they wanted to do to the Prophet, they could do. So they would mock him, they would throw camel intestines on him. It's a very sad story. Like, imagine a man sitting there praying and someone doing that. And the only person there to help defend him was his daughter. And while he was praying, she would come and she would wipe it off, right? Imagine such a sad scene. Someone doing something so evil and vile in front of his own children, right? This is something just disgusting. And his daughter was named Fatima, who was there. Also, we talked about how they used to treat widows and divorcees very evilly, like terrible. So the same man, Abu Lahab, 2 of his sons were married to 2 of the daughters of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And so they divorced them. Kind of like, you know what? We'll kind of just throwing you away, go back to your family. We don't have anything to do with you, right? Kind of as a sign to like demean them, right? And these were the things that Islam came to kind of protect women and teach them that this isn't something that's acceptable. And so these are some of the ways that they would kind of politically deal with the Prophet, peace be upon him, after the death of Abu Talib. After the passing of his wife, Prophet Muhammad, he really had so much love for her. In one of the statements he said, she believed in me when people disbelieved in me. Right? And this is him talking to other people, kind of showing them the type of person that Khadija was. She accepted me as truthful when people called me a liar. And she aided me with her own wealth. You can see the amount of like compassion he has for her. Like, these are the things she used to do for me, right? He obviously is going to miss her. And they call this year of the Prophet's life the year of grief, or the year of sorrow, and the year of sadness. In Arabic, it's Am al-Huzn. Because it was a very difficult time on him, right? They had just finished up being boycotted. His political and financial protection now had passed away. Okay? And 2 people from his own family that he dearly had affection and love for. All right. Same time. Some of the benefits we derive from this, though, I have listed a couple, and I want you guys to also chip in. Okay. Remember, we talked about in one of the earlier classes, who is more in need of God, right? A man drowning in the depths of the ocean, or a man in the comfort of his own home, right? You would assume that the man in the ocean, but in reality, both people are both in need of God just as much, right? Some of the benefits we derive from this is, even though if we might lose what we perceive to be protection in this life, one of the benefits that the Muslims at the time derived from it was now it increased their reliance on God, right? Obviously, it's a painful matter, it's a grieving matter, it's very sorrow. You feel for the Prophet, him losing both of two beloved people in his life. But there were some benefits. There is kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel, right? It also was difficult circumstances. They dictate a stronger sense of urgency, right? And it brings people together, right? It makes people unified and rely on each other as well, right? So for instance, if you were to lose a loved one in your family, you would notice the unity after that passing in your family, right? People would come together. Even if it was just a brief period of time, they would rely on each other. They'd go extra mile for each other at that time. So these were some of the benefits of this happening. Now, obviously, we don't want bad things to happen, but you always try to be optimistic, okay? Because it doesn't reward you to be pessimistic, all right? Can you also think of maybe a couple other gems or wisdoms or benefits after the passing of these people? Maybe not necessarily directly with this situation, but maybe in a situation you've faced as well. Yes. Good. You realize that this life is temporary, right? It's very temporary. And patience, while difficult, is definitely something that's short and temporary. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Okay, what else?
Whatever happens from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, makes us be strong.
Good.
Come out of the situation even more powerful.
Good. We know that God will never put us in a situation that we can't handle, right? So if we know that, then whatever happens to us is something we can handle, and that it is happening permitted by the grace of God, right? And knowing that makes us realize that there is some sort of wisdom behind it. Look always for the light at the end of the tunnel, not at like the dark bricks while you're in it, okay? Because that really helps put things in perspective for you, all right? Very good. Now after this, you can imagine some of the companions some of the Muslims at that time had already moved to Abyssinia, okay? But now you can see, now that even the Prophet himself has lost financial and political protection in a sense, they really need to find a place where they can just live peacefully, all right? So, the Prophet, peace be upon him, starts doing research on places he could possibly move to, all right? So after 10 years in living in Mecca, a city that was very dear to him, probably the most beloved city for him at that time, it was time to change the scenery, okay? Times were extremely tough, and they were ready to just move on with life, right? They kind of just got sick and tired of being persecuted all the time. They just want to live somewhere peacefully. So they looked to a city called Ta'if, and they had high hopes for this city. It was about 50 miles east from where Mecca was. So it's not that long of a walk. It's a couple-day journey, and it's something that's relatively close by that they would be able to go to over a short period of time. It wouldn't be too much of a hassle, especially considering the circumstances that they had already lived in. All right. So he goes there with one of his close friends named Abu Bakr. All right. He goes there and he requests an audience with the leaders of the tribes of that city. And after they hear him out, they start mocking him, right? And they laugh at him, and they even chase him out of the city. And they even call for people to start throwing rocks at them as they chase them out. So it's like humiliation upon humiliation. Even the children got involved. They were throwing rocks at their feet to make them run slower. And they said that after they had exited the city borders, that they had to stop and rest a little bit because their feet had started to crack and bleed. All right, and it was something very humiliating to go through. All right, you're a prophet of God. Imagine him, his emotions at that time. He's a prophet of God coming to people, trying to save them, give them protection, teach them about who God is, and they react this way. It's very humiliating and grieving. Okay, and this is on top of what he had already just gone through. The fact that he's there is already kind of like, my own people rejected me. I'm seeking help. Right? Imagine you in your life, something happens, maybe you get fired or whatever, you lose a family loved one, you go to someone, you confide in them, you tell them the problems you're going through, and they respond to you with mockery, making fun of you, exiling you, right? Chasing you out, right? It's very, very disheartening. Okay. Later on, it's the wife of the Prophet asked him, she said, what was the worst day of your life? And he said, the worst day of my life was that day, that incident. Not necessarily because he himself was humiliated, but because he came to a people with a message, and he wanted to share good with them, and they rejected him in such a brutal manner, right? Because the Prophet peace be upon him tells us in another narration, he says that, actually we'll get to that in the next slide. So after he leaves that city, he says, an angel comes to him, right? And it says, I could destroy that city. I could flip it upside down if you want me to. Just tell me the word, and it's taken care of. It's done. We'll do it for you right now. But he turns to the angel and he says, don't do so, for I would hope that Allah might make their descendants worship only Him. All right. This is very beautiful. Okay. Some of the lessons we take from this incident, and I know with the video we have we'll go through this slide and then we'll pause here because we've already gotten to our time limit. Some of the lessons we take from this is that it's always okay to get a fresh start. Okay? Don't be afraid of fresh starts because it makes you stronger, right? And it also shows you who you can really rely on and seek for help, all right? Obviously, we put our reliance and protection in the hands of God, but at the same time, we have people around us that can help us out. A fresh start will show you those who are actually willing to do so, okay? Second is persistence, all right? Even though the Prophet was humiliated by his own people and kind of exiled, and he goes out to another people and humiliated by them, that's not the last chapter of his life, right? Persistence is important and critical, okay? Because as we talked about, as she mentioned, patience, difficult times only last for a few moments, especially when you consider it to the span of your lifetime, all right? So it's always important to look at the light at the end of the tunnel. And there's wisdom in seeing beyond just your current circumstance. He's faced now with a city that rejected him. But you know what? Maybe their children might have softer hearts and accept Islam. So therefore, he didn't want destruction to come to them, right? Also, you look at the nobility and uprightness. Nobility and uprightness are decided by God, not by people's perception. To his own people and to the city of Ta'if, he was seen as someone that would break families apart, right? They looked at him in a bad manner. They thought he was a crazy person, whatever, right? Even though they themselves didn't believe this, as you saw Omar, when he actually started to read the verses of the Quran, he's like, this is what we're trying to stop people from learning, right? Even though they themselves don't believe it about the message and about the Prophet, they still attributed it to him, okay? So realize that nobility and uprightness, it's not based on what people's perception is, but based on what God tells us and dictates for us, all right? So just because it's not okay or culturally acceptable to stand up for a person or whatever it is, doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, all right? We also know that pain and pleasure are temporary, but we must stay disciplined, right? This is again going back to being patient. There's a beautiful quote. It said, every person faces one of two pains, either the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. Okay? Everybody faces one of two pains, The pain of discipline, being disciplined in what you believe in, or the pain of regret. And the pain of regret lasts a lot longer than being disciplined in a brief moment or two. All right? It's a very wise quote. You can apply this to any aspect of your life, right? Whether it's people making fun of you, whether it's studying, right? Any aspect of your life, you could apply this principle to. All right? Also, it shows you the mercy and showing mercy and compassion to those who insulted you. All right? And this is seen by the angel, the story after him leaving the city and tribe and having hope and mercy for the generations even after them. All right? It also shows you the Prophet's outlook to the duty of his people, right? He says he would hope that Allah might make their descendants help him. In another narration, the Prophet says, the parable of myself and that of my nation is that of a man who kindles a fire. All right, so imagine you're in the middle of a desert and you start like a bonfire, all right? And you see flies and moths start to fly towards it, okay? So he's saying, I am like the man in the middle of a desert who has a fire in front of him and is swatting people away from it, trying to protect them from it. Because you know what? For the insect or the bug or whatever, the fire looks very appealing, okay? It provides warmth, it looks like it's very nice, get close to it. But guess what happens when they actually fly into it? You hear that cracking sound? They just got burned, right? That's kind of like living according to your desires. It looks very luxurious, but in the end it burns you. So he's saying, I am to my people like the man standing in front of a fire trying to stop people from getting too close. All right? And this is one of the reasons why you see that this is the worst day of his life. He didn't say the worst day of his life when his uncle passed away or his wife passed away. But the worst day of his life was the day that he came to people giving them a message of goodness, right? Of true success, and they rejected it. All right? Also, what are some personal things you take from these stories that we learned today, and how do you apply it to your life? This is kind of where we're going to end with, kind of just to start this discussion and conclude with it. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so like she said, after their conversion, they actually then started to pray in congregation together at the Kaaba because of Hamza and Umar, and not because of him, but because now people were kind of scared to like start a fight when they knew that Hamza and Umar right there, because how strong and brave these people were. So, but also as she mentioned, right? What was the first part? No, the point you made before that was never losing faith, right? Very good. Not just in yourself, but in people too, right? The guy was like, you know what? Omar is such like a Muslim hater. He's like such an Islamophobe that his donkey would become Muslim before himself. And Omar converted, and the rest is history, right? He was one of the greatest Muslims I've ever lived. The second person that led the community of the Muslims after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? A man who was so beloved that he actually, the wife of the Prophet gave up her spot to be buried next to the Prophet, to Omar, so that Omar could be buried there. So that's how great of a person he was, right? They have like a famous quote, I'm sure many people have heard it, right? Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. So never lose hope in yourself, but also in other people, okay? Very good. Any other personal reflections you have from this? How many people, like when they saw like Omar convert and people walked up to him and hugged him, kind of reminisce like maybe the day you converted and people did that to you? You get like ambushed kind of. Yeah, so, and you saw like the Arab like two-way hug and stuff, and okay. Mm-hmm. 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 Hmm. Mom. Mm-hmm.
the thing you are really relying on is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it just brought me so much more closer. So, and it brought our family closer as well. So we are now not relying on her calling us. We are now talking to each other much more.
Mm.
She was like the epitome of the relationship.
She's like the matriarch.
Yeah, she's gone
Wow.
now. So we are now much more making effort.
So yeah, so you lost your aunt and it brought you all closer together.
To one another, not
Yeah.
depending on the other generations. So yeah, loss
Mm-hmm.
can bring you much more closer to God.
Definitely.
That's personally special. Alhamdulillah, thank God for that. And there's just one more thing, you know, when you said two pains, the
Mm-hmm.
pain of
Discipline.
discipline and the pain of regret.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think the pain of discipline, you always see light after that. It's
Yeah.
rewarded fantastically. The pain of regret is not always rewarded because you can't undo the harm that you
No,
did
you
with
can't.
stupidity.
Yeah.
So you can maybe not harm others, but it's too late for
Definitely.
not always fruitful, whereas discipline is always fruitful.
Discipline. The pain of discipline is always fruitful, whereas the pain of regret never is fruitful. Yeah. And it lasts for a long time too. So. Yeah. A couple other personal reflections.
I think the times back then and present,
Mm-hmm.
more or less the same kind of hardship. Anyone who tries to embrace Islam
Mm-hmm.
and then tries to overcome all the hardship, local differences. Back then it was clans and
Mm-hmm.
tribes and all. As such over here, it's family, friends, social media.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like especially if someone who embraces Islam and then their family kind of rejects them, you can definitely see some of the correlations to that time. Whereas it's a little different here because the society we live in and of itself isn't necessarily pursuing that aim, I guess, if you will. Whereas back then it was definitely probably a little bit worse actually than it is today. But there are definitely some similarities, especially for people going through that in their own family, having that issue. I just saw with Omar, right? He's like a man, like a little brother to him. He's like, "You're Muslim, right?" He's like, "Yeah, I would never have let you stop me from becoming Muslim, right?" So, very similar. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Okay. All right. Jazakallah khair for everyone coming. We ask that Allah make this a benefit for us. We ask that He protect us. That we ask that He makes us of those who strictly rely on Him alone, that seek Him. And it's such a beautiful thing that when we recite the first chapter of the Quran in our daily prayers, that we always say that you alone we seek aid from, you alone we seek help from, and we seek His guidance. So we always constantly ask Him for guidance in this life, and that He protects us and makes us of those who are an ease on others and not a burden, and a guiding light for others. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة. Lord, give us the best of this life. وفي الآخرة حسنة, and the best of the next life. وقنا عذاب النار, and protect us from the torrents of the fire. Wassalamu alaikum.